Hi, I'm Mitchell Ringos. Welcome to Word for Word, where we offer you an in-depth look at some of our interviews with newsmakers from across the region. You'll have the opportunity to hear word for word how they responded to the news of the day. The Ontario government has announced nearly $11 million in extra annual funding for homelessness prevention in the Thunder Bay District, as local MPP Kevin Holland made the announcement at the Thunder Bay District Social Services Board headquarters.
This community.
Well, I really can't put into words how big of a deal this actually is for Thunder Bay and the district. The increase in funding to address the homelessness problem that we're facing across the district. This increase in funding is going to just move mountains in getting that accomplished for our region. It's been advocacy work, extreme hard work from the board, but advocacy from the board to government, as Bill mentioned earlier. Involved in that is my time on the DSAB board. But being able to take that now in my role as MPP and really impress upon the government with regards to the work that the team has done, that the circumstances in regions across the province need to be a consideration in how we provide funding to different areas of the province. They've heard that message, and we are delivering that funding appropriately. It should be noted, of the 40% increase in the overall funding, we're receiving 197% increase. So it really is indicative of how our government is addressing the local circumstances.
Bill had kind of mentioned this, the fact the ability to not only just put this towards programming, but put this towards capital, brick and mortar projects. Right. I mean, just speak maybe to the importance of that from that perspective.
Sure.
Yeah.
So I saw before I was elected as MPP, serving on the board, that the government in 2019, I believe it was, joined the 3 different programs under one, the homelessness prevention program. And that really freed up overhead and cumbersome and burdensome operating guidelines and reporting of the service providers across the province. And it focused more money back onto capital and being able to build the homes that are needed. So, and this increase in funding, as Bill indicated, majority of that is going to go towards actually shovels in the ground and building the homes and providing those spaces that are necessary for the people that need homes and places to live. So by streamlining the process and by increasing the funding, we are making a real difference on addressing the homelessness problem in Thunder Bay. And as I said in my remarks earlier, that will help trickle down to address some of the mental health and addiction problems that we're facing, because we recognize as a government that providing homes and housing people is a foundational piece of ending some of the other social issues that we face as a community.
You talked about the fact that the DSAB here is getting a much larger increase than the average across the province. Can you just take us a little bit behind the scenes in terms of what were those conversations like to get to that point where the government was satisfied that was justified, I guess?
It was being able to take the work that the DSAB team has done and the advocacy work that I did while serving on the DSAB board, and really communicating to the government the need to be doing things differently. Too many times we've seen organizations go to government saying we want, and the DSAB didn't take that approach. They identified a problem. They explained what the impact was having on our community. They presented a solution that would work for our region, and highlighted what the benefits are going to be, not just for the people that needed the housing, but for the organization and the government in general. And that's a message that really resonated. So with the programming that we're putting in place, for the first time, we have a component of measuring outcomes as a result, and that is key. For too many years, we were putting money into programming and overhead that wasn't being effective in solving the problem. By measuring the ability to measure outcomes, we can quickly adapt and make the changes that are necessary to ensure that the intention of the program is actually working.
I think we've heard for several years from advocates on the ground, local leaders, a lot of frustration. I think it's fair to say even anger towards the province and the feds for, in their view, not stepping up to do enough on these issues. Do you hope this might kind of maybe shift the dial in how people think about your government and how you're approaching the issue of homelessness?
Yeah, this is one of several measures that our government has introduced over the last, prior in the first term of the Doug Ford government, but since the election in 2022. This is, just one of several measures that our government is taking to address the problem. We also know that Ontario is underfunded by $500 million in supportive housing from the federal government. So we have some work to do to make sure that the federal government is adequately providing that funding that's so desperately needed in Ontario. But failing that happening, we are stepping up and doing what needs to be done to address the problem here.
It's going to be a positive, very positive increase in our funding allocation, essentially tripling what we currently were receiving.
What could this money then go towards? Like what types of programs?
Well, the great thing about HPP, the province has agreed that this money can also be used for capital. So although the plans have not been fully finalized or approved yet, the intent is to look at using a large portion of the increase, almost $11 million increase, towards actually building spaces for people, so in transitional and supportive housing. That's something that's been really lacking for many years, that the ability to do that and the capacity to add more spaces for people in those types of needs.
What kind of an impact would this have upon the city, the area in general? Because obviously the DSAB covers quite a large area.
I think a very positive impact. It's a 3-year planning allocation, and it will again allow us with community partners who are willing to develop more units of transitional and supportive housing, to take really some pressure, I think, too, off the community housing stream, where we do have many people living in what's supposed to be an independent living situation that are struggling with that and do need more supports and do need supports on site and in many cases 24/7. And that's what this type of funding, including the ability to use it for capital, will assist with.
And how soon could this funding come in, and when could we start seeing, you as an organization too, be able to start seeing some tangible changes, that brick and mortar aspect as well?
Well, we're putting out an expression of interest for interested community partners to respond to, and we've got a deadline of June 30th for them to respond. So we're hoping that we could actually have some capital projects underway, maybe starting before the end of the year, and then completing sometime, maybe 12 months or so after that. So that, we're really looking forward to that.
I mean, we've been talking for years and hearing for years from lots of community organizations, including the DSAB, that more supportive housing, other kinds of housing are needed. How far does this go to kind of meet what you've been asking for and other organizations have?
Well, I think we've been saying, based on information gathered from supportive housing providers and what we see with people we support in community housing, at a minimum, we think there's a need for at least 250 units of transitional supportive housing, possibly more. We see from the by names list, which is what we're using now, rather than point in time counts to assess the level of need. There's more than 750 people on the by names list who are either homeless or accessing homeless prevention type services. So there's significant need for this, and this will significantly help with that. But there is also the need for the federal government to provide additional investments as well, through things like the Rapid Housing Initiative, and hopefully increased funding through the National Co-Investment Housing Fund as well. But this is a great investment by the province of Ontario, and it's historic in the magnitude of the increase.
The leader of the federal NDP made a trip to Thunder Bay last week. Jagmeet Singh met with local union leaders to talk about affordability and the difficulties workers in the Northwest are facing. And he made a pledge to healthcare workers and those in other sectors that they'll be supported by his party.
First question, you spoke and we heard a lot during the roundtable about cost of food and everything. Recently, our local food distribution association had literally empty shelves. Are there any plans federally that could help that? Because that seems to be a problem everywhere across Canada, but especially in remote communities and places like Thunder Bay that service the more remote communities.
Yeah, we heard the reliance now on food distribution networks and people relying on food banks, and food not being available is a serious problem, particularly in the north. So there are ways for the federal government to step up and provide more supports, and we'll pursue some of those avenues. We also need to really be serious about the fact that at a time when Canadians are having the most difficult time buying groceries, the very same corporate CEOs of those grocery stores are making more money than ever before. That is clearly wrong. That can't be. That the most profits ever are being made for these corporate CEOs while people are struggling with food. There's clearly a disconnect here. So that's something where the federal government has to step up. And we've been saying we've got to have better protection for consumers, more competition laws that break up the monopoly of some of these really powerful corporations and make sure workers and people are put first.
Can you maybe speak to building off that question and answer there? Obviously, we're talking affordability a lot today. Based on what role would the NDP play in that? Because obviously, I think we've seen the influence that this party can have in a coalition government. What are some of the things you'll be pushing for more affordability, maybe specifically in the Northwest? Because we did hear a lot of region-specific issues today.
Right. So we have an agreement which gives us the ability to force the government to do things. We're not in a coalition, but we're going to use our power to fight back against the things that we think are problematic. That's why we fought for a GST rebate. That's going to help disproportionately people in the north. It's going to double the amount that people get in their GST rebate. That's a little bit of relief. And if you've ever been struggling and ever felt the squeeze of not being able to afford to put food on the table, sometimes you just need a break, and that's a break that we're getting for people. But we need more than that, and that's why we're really targeting in the north, but across the country, the companies that are making money off the backs of workers, these corporate CEOs of large grocery stores, are literally gouging Canadians, and that has to stop. So some of the concrete solutions. There needs to be better protections in place for consumers. Right now, there is really no protections when consumers are being gouged in that way. So we've talked about some better strengthening the laws around competition laws so that we don't have these monopolies that are gouging Canadians. We also need to make sure that what we've seen in Europe is that when companies are gouging workers, what Europe has decided in the United Kingdom, in Germany, and Spain, they put in an excess profit tax on companies that are gouging people to tackle the corporate greed. So United Kingdom put in a tax like that on the oil and gas companies because they're making some of the highest profits ever while people are paying the highest prices at the pumps. So they put in this as a disincentive to stop these companies from gouging people. We want to do something similar here in Canada. It can't be that the answer to all the struggles that we're up against is to put the burden on workers. In the pandemic, it was workers that bore the brunt of it, while Amazon and online companies made record profits. In this inflationary period, workers are struggling, where banks and insurance companies, grocery companies, oil and gas companies are again making record profits. The response has always been, put more burden on workers. We're saying, no, it's got to stop. We need to lift up workers and support them.
Can you maybe speak to bringing it back to today's visit? We heard a lot of difficult stories from healthcare representatives today. And I know that's an issue countrywide, but here in Thunder Bay specifically, our regional hospital has to take on a lot and really support the region for things that can't be done outside of Thunder Bay. Simply, can you speak more to that from what you heard from these stories, your thoughts, and what more can be done?
I'd say the number one thing that needs to be done is respecting these workers. A lot of the stories were workers not being respected. Their concerns around safety not being respected and not having proper security in place. Their concerns around not having adequate wages or work-life balance. Really, it comes down to respecting workers. And while it's clear that the Conservative government here in Ontario does not respect these workers, the federal government's got to step up and provide better supports, whether that's with national guidelines around one of the main issues that came up was often the overworked nurses or healthcare workers in general, long-term care, personal support workers, that these workers are having to do so much work because they're understaffed. And if we had a better staffing level, so the right number of workers per patient or client in a long-term care home, that would actually alleviate some of the burdens. And making sure that we are hiring, our public healthcare system is giving support, not doubling down on agency or for-profit work, which is only going to make things worse for these healthcare workers. There's a lot of solutions, and I was really sad to hear a lot of the really heartbreaking stories. But out of it, I also want to remind us that we can do better. It doesn't have to be this way. And I want to give people hope that if we actually invested in our public healthcare system, if we hired enough workers, if we retained the workers we had, if we respected these workers, made sure they were paid a good wage and had good pensions and were supported and respected, they would be able to do the work that they love, the work that they were trained to do. It's these work conditions that are really making it hard on workers, and there's fixes for that.
The streets of the Waterfront District came to life on Sunday as hundreds of people came to explore the various local wares at the 2023 Craft Revival. We spoke with Executive Director Kara Pratt, who said its impact on the community over the years has been exponential.
Talk a little bit about, I guess, how the Craft Revival is going so far.
It's a great turnout for the Craft Revival this spring. The weather has not dampened anything, in all honesty. The rain is holding up, and it's beautiful to see people out in the streets.
Can you talk about, I guess, some of the stores and vendors that are involved?
Yeah, absolutely. We have 22 locations this spring, and we have 153 artisans, and the whole idea is to get people into unusual places, so into small retailers that we have a lot of in Thunder Bay, small restaurants, and the overflow ends up in the Prince Arthur's Landing, in the Delta, and the Baggage Arts Building.
And how long has, I guess, the Craft Revival been going on for?
We were actually discussing that this morning. It started in 2014, a small event inside one of our board chair's, her mother's living room, and we have expanded it. I guess it'll be 9 years, and we're thinking 15, because we had to cut a couple out during the pandemic, actual in-person events.
I guess, how much of an impact has the Craft Revival have on, I guess, artisans in the city since it started?
We're in hundreds of thousands of dollars. We have some stats from previous years, so we had about 3,000 people down during the spring event, and we get 6,000 or more during our holiday events. So you take that, $50 per person, it really impacts the economy in a very positive way. And that $50 is underestimating how much people would spend, probably like $150. And then that rolls out into our restaurants. People have like a drink, so maybe some snacks, and all of these small businesses or the artisans go out and shop within the city with the money that they make. So the impact is exponential. Yeah.
And I was gonna say, how important is it to keep these events going year after year?
I think the importance is, it's very important to keep them going. It gets community together, it gets people into different places. It really showcases what Thunder Bay can do. We have a ton of talented artisans, we have a lot of small businesses, and they're what keeps our economy, because we're so isolated, everything going. And it brings a lot of new perspectives into Thunder Bay, because we started out very small, like 6 artisans in a living room, and now, 153 for a spring event, over 250 for a holiday event, and it brings a lot out in Thunder Bay. Yeah. You see something similar to Oak or One of a Kind in Toronto. This is our comparator, or the competitive kind of thing, the edge that we have up here.
Thanks for joining us for today's edition of Word for Word. We'll be back tomorrow with more interviews from across the Northwest.